I knew it. I knew we could not trust Energy Minister Chris Bowen to fly to this latest UN global warming conference in Azerbaijan with his pockets full of our money. And sure enough, it's just wowed the crowd there by saying he'll give another $50 million of our money to other countries to do something about global warming.
We believe that climate action makes economic sense at every level, from the household budget to the nation's economy.
It makes sense when we pay and pay and pay and make no difference to the climate anyway. But good news. There are now 2 energy ministers called Chris. The bad news, of course, is that Australia's got the wrong one. Australia has Chris Bowen, who's just doubled down in this climate conference on his jihad against our reliable coal-fired electricity and refused to help other countries get more nuclear power. But now, meet the other Chris, Chris Wright, who founded Liberty Energy, a giant in fracking for gas, a man who's now been picked by incoming US President Donald Trump to be America's next energy minister, or as they say, Energy Secretary. And this Chris sounds nothing like our Chris because he uses reason, not emotion. I tell you what, it's going to be a nightmare for our Chris Bowen, making him seem like a fact-free idiot in comparison. Because let me show you. Our Chris claims that climate change is an existential threat. America's Chris says that's rubbish.
There is no climate crisis. Since the end of World War II, global human life expectancy, wealth, health, and opportunity have surged like never before. Hence, any negative impacts from climate change were clearly overwhelmed by the benefits of increasing energy consumption.
Our Chris then goes the scare. We'll die from global warming.
Every year, more of us are sweltering through increasingly deadly heat waves.
But America's Chris says, calm down.
Globally, 5 times more people die every year from the cold than die from the heat. And as the world keeps getting wealthier and society keeps progressing, we're making energy more expensive, and we're growing these tragedies, not addressing these tragedies.
Now, our Chris will then smear a guy like that as a climate denier. But America's Chris says, well, no, he's not. He's just practical. He says, true, the world has warmed slightly since 1850, but the good from using the fossil fuels that have made us richer and safer outweighs the bad. But our Chris claims we can and must now replace that coal and gas with renewables. Go net zero emissions, he says. But America's Chris says that transition is not happening, and it won't. In fact, for all the billions we spend on green energy, we're using more fossil fuels than ever.
We took a careful look at where energy growth is coming from. In 2010, the world consumed about 500 exajoules of energy. Now, the world consumes about 600 exajoules of energy. 40% of the additional energy in the planet came from natural gas. Second fastest growing energy source on the planet over the last 12 years, oil. 24% of the additional energy came from oil. And third fastest growing source of energy on the planet is coal.
Now, our Chris, of course, won't listen to stuff like this. He claims we simply need to invest, he means spend, more on wind and solar. And he says that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. Well, says America's Chris, that's wrong.
You can build a lot of wind and solar, and then at night the sun's not shining, and then sometimes the wind doesn't blow, and you have no energy. So to keep society running, you have to have a whole separate energy system of dispatchable, reliable. It's just very expensive to maintain 2 grids.
And of course, our Energy Minister, Chris, is an anti-nuclear Luddite.
There's a ban on nuclear power. Nuclear power is risky.
But America's Energy Minister, Chris, is all for it.
I'm a huge fan of nuclear and have been since I was a kid. Like, we should be doubling down, tripling down.
You're ahead of your time.
We should be tripling down on nuclear. Ultimately, we will, because it's an alternative that works. It has the high energy density. It works when it's dark. It works when the wind's not blowing. It's reliable power. Nuclear power has an incredible safety record, the best safety record of every energy alternative we have out there, including my industry.
But there is one other contrast, and it's something that our Energy Minister, Chris Bowen, does not discuss, but America's Energy Minister Chris Wright does. It's something that makes all this talk about getting rid of coal, oil and gas a farce because it goes far beyond electricity.
There's an impression that soon we'll be done with oil and gas. People honestly believe that in 10, 20, or 30 years at most, we won't use hydrocarbons. Nearly zero chance of that happening. We don't have replacements for so many of the things we use hydrocarbons for. I said nitrogen fertilizer. Like, we have no other way to make nitrogen fertilizer but natural gas and a catalyst in a high energy process. Steel, cement, plastics, and fertilizer, those four pillars of the modern world, we use almost as much energy to produce those as the entire global electricity system.
Now, you may wonder why I'd trust America's Chris over our own. Well, I think you probably can tell from those clips which Chris seems to best understand energy and the challenges ahead, and is more likely to tell you straight. No politics, no spin. If you don't believe me, check the science for yourself. But also check their records. Our Chris Bowen, has a record of failure. He was a failure as our immigration minister, letting in 24,000 boat people, and is a failure now as energy and climate change minister. He's just presided over more disasters. Investors have walked away from his green hydrogen plans. His build-out of wind farms is behind and over budget, and his promise to cut your electricity bills by $275, of course, turned out to be a sick joke. America's Chris, though, has meanwhile made himself and his shareholders a lot of money by fracking for gas, helping to turn the United States last year into the world's top exporter. So compare the Chris's. Which Chris would you trust to keep on the lights?